honor for me to be here, and I'm sure that in general you know much more than I do about the history and development of the use of human bodies to study medicine and to do medical research. That's not my field. My interest comes from the direction of the history and development of Jewish law or Jewish tradition about this topic. And I would like to begin my talk. First of all, I also have to apologize that I am not speaking in Spanish. When I grow up, I will learn Spanish, but now I do not yet know Spanish, so I will have to speak in English. And so what I will do first is to present a brief understanding of what is the background to this discussion from a historical perspective, and then we will get to the discussion that happened about 90 years ago between two great rabbis in the land of Israel, which at that time was the Palestine Mandate of Great Britain, and two great rabbis there had a difference of opinion about this topic. Okay, so we begin in the beginning, in the first book of the Bible, and it says, God created the human in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So the idea that the human being is in the image of God is at the foundation myth of the Hebrew Bible. But what does this mean, that the human being is in the image of God? This is a deep philosophical and theological question which over time different people and different thinkers had different opinions. If you read the Bible, you will see that frequently God is described as looking with his eyes. He gets angry in a certain place. In the second book of the Bible of Exodus, it says that after receiving the revelation at Sinai, Moses and 70 elders of the Jewish people, of the Israelite people, went up and they saw God sitting on a chair. So, the idea that the image of God is not the physical image of a human being is because of later philosophical developments in the Middle Ages, when it was discovered or argued or thought philosophically that anything that has a body cannot be eternal. Therefore, if God is eternal, he cannot have a body. So, from a certain time in the Middle Ages, Jewish thinkers agreed God does not have a body. But before that, it was not so clear. So when it says here that man or human beings were created in God's image, we will see later one possible implication of this. And then it says in the second chapter, the Lord God formed the human, in Hebrew Adam, from the dust of the earth, Adamah. So there's a play in Hebrew between the human and earth. And the human is formed from earth. and blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living creature. Then, when the snake came in the famous story and convinced Eva to eat from the forbidden fruit, and she gave it also to her husband, and God was angry at the story. And one of the things that he said to the man is, by the sweat of your brow shall you eat bread until you return to the earth. For from it were you taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Now you can see here, if we think about it, a ground, a philosophical and theological ground for the idea of burial. The person is returning to the earth, to the dust from which humans were created. Okay, that's the first introduction. The second introduction, in the 5th book of the Bible, in Deuteronomy, it talks about a person who was guilty of a terrible crime and was put to death by the court. And one of the things that used to be done in ancient times was that the person who was killed, they didn't kill by hanging. But after they put the person to death, they used to hang the body on a pole to show everybody this is the evil person. And he got punished for his terrible crime. But it says, if a person is guilty of a capital offense, meaning that he is killed and is put to death, and you hang the body on a wooden pole, you must not let the corpse remain on the pole overnight, but must bury it the same day. For a hanging body is God's curse, so that you not pollute the land that the Lord your God is giving you in estate. So, on the one hand, this person is a terrible criminal. The court put him to death. But on the other hand, we are not allowed to have his body on display overnight. Before, immediately, so what they used to do, as it described in the later book of the rabbinic tradition, in the Mishnah, which was in about the year 200 of the Common Era, they used to put up the body on the pole, and after 5 seconds take it down and bury it. You shall not leave the body overnight. And the rabbis learned from this that if a criminal, a wicked, sinful criminal, you're not allowed to do that to him, but you must bury him immediately. Certainly, any other person who dies, you should bury them immediately. So the idea of burying immediately is found even with regard to the worst criminal, and strongly certainly for every other person. And by doing this, the person is returning to the earth, to the dust from which he or she was created. And somehow, if the body is hanging there, it's a curse from God, or a curse of God. We are now going to the next phase of of Judaic literature after the Bible, is Mishnah, which was composed by a group of rabbis in the land of Israel in about the year 200. And one of the things that they tell a person who is coming to be a witness in court, and the person is being asked to be a witness, and this will decide if the accused person is going to be killed by the court or is going to stay alive. And they tell the person, before you speak, think carefully about the tremendous value of every human life. And they say to him, Adam, the first man, was created alone to teach you that anyone who causes the loss of one soul, it is as if he destroyed an entire world. And anyone who preserves one soul, it is as if he preserved an entire world. So when you bear witness in a case of, remember the value of the human life. And this was another reason why the first human being was created alone. Also for the sake of peace, so that one person will not say to another, my father was greater than your father. No, all human beings come from the same father and the same mother. And another reason that human was created alone, to tell of the greatness of the Holy One of God, blessed be He. For when a person stamps several coins with one seal, they are all similar to each other, but the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, stamped all people with the seal of Adam, the first man, and not one of them is similar to another. We are all human, we are all from the same original ancestors, but each one of us is uniquely different, says the Mishnah. Therefore, every person is obligated to say, the world was created for me. Each human being should recognize that they have special importance and a unique aspect of humanity is in each person and no one else. So from this Mishnah, you see the importance of saving human life and preserving human life, which of course is one of the great goals of medicine. So, on the one hand, it's a commandment to bury the dead person immediately because of the honor. This person was created in the image of God, but he has to now return to dust, so we have to bury him or her immediately. On the other hand, it's very, very important to save life. Every human life is precious and unique, and therefore we have a contradiction. Because if we want to use a body for medical research, we're not going to bury it overnight. Okay? So this is the basic contradiction between two values and two vectors which have to be worked out by the tradition in order to see how to relate to medical research and medical studies which use human bodies, which sometimes can stay for months without being buried. Now, I will say that this was not so much a problem until modern times. Why? Because the whole use of dissection to study anatomy and to do medical research and so on was not the way that classically medicine was taught in ancient times and medieval times. Only later on this developed. So this problem, these two values are ancient, but the conflict between them is modern. Now I will say that in the Mishnah, we're now around, let's look at line 44. Rabbi Meir says, what is the meaning of the biblical word for a hanging body as God's curse? Like two twin brothers, similar to each other. One was king over the entire earth, and the other became a robber after some time. The one who became a robber was caught, and they crucified him, he's living in Roman times, on a cross. He's not talking about Christian belief, he's talking about what the Romans did to criminals. All the passers-by would say, it seems that the king is crucified. So, since the human was created in God's image, it seems, if we keep him hanging, that we are insulting God's image. And the sages also said that anyone who leaves his deceased overnight, what does it mean, his deceased? The basic obligation of burial. It says you should bury them immediately. But on whom is this obligation? On the close relatives of the person who died. Children, parents, brothers, sisters. Now, if there's no close relatives, then it goes to the entire community. But the original responsibility is the family. Anyone who leaves his deceased, the dead person, overnight without burying him, transgresses a prohibition, because it says you should bury immediately. But if he left the deceased overnight for the sake of his honor, to bring a coffin or shrouds to wrap the body, he does not transgress that prohibition. So, already in ancient times, they said, okay, we should bury the body immediately, but if we're doing it in his honor, now who is he? His, there's a discussion. Does it mean the dead person's honor? Does the dead person feel dishonor? Does he feel anything? So then the rabbi said, no, it means his honor, it means the honor of the family, the honor of the community. So actually, how we behave towards the dead person is a way in which we honor humanity. Because we, as live human beings, honor humanity by treating the dead with respect and in a proper way. Okay, now I want to skip further because I want to keep within the time framework. Okay, I want to skip now to line 66. Okay, so let's say line 64, it says, anyone acting for the honor of the living is not performing debasement, insult, or destroyal of the dead. And then it says in Tosefta, which is another rabbinic work at the time, or also around the 2nd century, the mitzvot, the commandments, were given to Israel, to the people of Israel, to live by them. As it is written in the 3rd book of the Bible, God says, keep my statutes and my laws, that a person shall do and live by them. Live by them and not die by them. We don't want, it's not right that observance and commitment to the commandments should cause death. Okay, so saving of life overrides everything. Well, it turns out not completely everything. There are 3 things. Let's say if somebody, a very clear example, if somebody says, come to me. They said, he's a criminal. He says, look at that person over there, that's Pedro. You go kill him. So I said, why should I kill Pedro? I have nothing to do with Pedro. He says, no, I'm telling you to go kill Pedro, and if you don't, I'm going to kill you. So the proper answer, according to rabbinic tradition, is you cannot know that your blood is redder than the blood of Pedro. No person can know that their life is more important than the life of someone else, so you have to refuse. And you have to say, I will not kill Pedro. You can do to me whatever, but I'm not going to do that because not everything I can do to save my own life. But mostly, yes. The famous example of a very important mitzvah, very important commandment that people should put aside in order to save lives is Shabbat. Shabbat, the seventh day, is a day of rest, a day in which Jewish people are not supposed to do any work of any kind. And about the year 160 something BC, the enemies of the Jewish people discovered this, and they came and they attacked people on Shabbat. And the people said, we can't do anything. And they were killed. And then the rabbis thought about it and they said, no, to save your life, you can fight back. You don't have to be killed on Shabbat. And they generalized this, Shabbat is less important than saving human life. And until today, that's a very clear principle that anything that a Jewish person would not do on Shabbat ever, but if there is, say, danger to life, or even a slight possible that someone we know, oh, we heard a big explosion there. Maybe nothing happened. Maybe nobody got hurt. No. Go there and check because you might be able to save a life. And here is an example that's connected to the topic that we are talking about on line number 79. When a woman dies while in labor, she's giving birth. A pregnant woman is giving birth and she dies in childbirth. As you know, until very recently, this was probably the most common source of death for women in their childbearing years. Many, many women died in childbirth. What should we do? A knife should be brought on the Shabbat and the woman's belly cut open and the fetus removed, for perhaps it will still be alive. Now this fetus was never alive, outside, breathing air. And to cut open the woman's belly is an insult to the body, right? It's desecration, a dishonor of the body. But in order to possibly save that, perhaps we can save the child, that's what we do even on Shabbat. For Shabbat laws shall be violated even when there is only a doubt that this may save a life. Even in such instance when we have no definite presumption that the fetus is alive, we didn't check the fetus, we have no way of knowing if it's still alive or not until we take it out. But we should on Shabbat do all of this, including to dishonor the woman's body in order to save possibly the child. Okay, now we move ahead, we can go up. Let's see, we can get to, let's go to line, the next page, 105. Okay. Sometime around the end of the 18th century, 1790 or something like that, a great rabbi, the chief rabbi of Prague, this is not this rabbi yet, was asked about the following question that was sent to him from London. A Jewish man had a problem in his gallbladder, and the doctors performed an operation, and the operation failed, and the patient died. The doctors want to do a dissection of this person's body to see if perhaps they, by studying what failed in the operation, they will be able to discover how to do the operation better in the future. And Rabbi Landa said, oh no, it's very important not to bury the body immediately and so on. And he says, look, if we did have another person with this sickness here before us, and we knew that possibly his life or her life we could save by the dissection, we would say yes, do it. But we don't have any such person before us now. We can't do a dissection in the hope or the possibility that sometime, somewhere in the future that we don't know about, this will happen. So it's not enough. Secondly, he said, and this was true at that time, nobody wants to give their body for dissection. Where do medical schools get the bodies from? From dead criminals or people that died without any relatives and nobody is burying them and they're lying in the morgue? That's where the medical schools get their bodies for dissection and for research. And if we Jewish people will now say that we allow to carry out easily dissection on dead bodies, everybody will go and they'll take all the Jewish bodies because we'll be the only ones that are permitting this. So he said, no, we won't allow the dissection for the future possible study of maybe somebody will have that sickness and what to do. If we have somebody now before us, okay. Okay, we're jumping fast forward to the early 1930s. Rabbi Abraham Kook was the chief rabbi of Palestine. The British came in early 1920s and established that there would be a chief rabbi. Until then, there was no chief rabbi of Palestine because Palestine was not a geographical unit in the Ottoman Empire. They just made the borders differently. When the British came, they said there's going to be an Ashkenazic chief rabbi and a Sephardic chief rabbi of two places where many Jews came from. And so Rabbi Kook was the chief rabbi. And the question was, in 1925, there was established the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Now, obviously, if you're establishing a university, yes, you will have a faculty of medicine, right? Okay, but if you have a faculty of medicine, you have to have bodies for dissection, to learn anatomy, to learn pathology, and if you want to do research. Oh, but now we see that this is a problem. So the rabbis in general were opposed to opening the faculty of medicine because of this reason. And some person wrote to Rabbi Kook, Jacob Stein, I don't know who he is, that maybe we could ask people who are still alive to agree that when they die, they are donating their body to medicine, and we can use those bodies. Rav Kook was not happy with that possibility, and he said, in line 111, in my opinion, the prohibition to disfigure a dead body is a prohibition that is special to Israelites, meaning to the Jewish people. I don't know if he was correct, but he heard from what he knew of different cultures, and he, for some reason, believed that this biblical prohibition not to disfigure a dead body and to bury it immediately without waiting at all is a special part of the Jewish tradition and not of the general human tradition. For the Holy One, blessed be He, meaning God, commanded us regarding the holiness of the body, just as we are also prohibited to consume forbidden foods. Okay, Jews have to eat kosher, and they have to treat the human body in a special way, and that's part of the Jewish religion. This is not because of anything in the natural body, but because of the holiness that is special to Israel, whom God called a holy nation. So the body is not specially holy, but the commandments given to the Jewish people make them specially a holy nation. And the Gentiles, who refrain from eating only foods that are naturally harmful, they don't have the whole system of kashrut, similarly have no reason to have special concern with regard to the disfigurement of the body, meaning dissection, when this is necessary for some natural purpose such as medicine. Therefore, we should purchase at full price corpses of the nations of the world for this scientific purpose. We should look, maybe in India, maybe in some other country, there are people and they are willing to sell their bodies, or their relatives are willing to sell their bodies for a good price, and we should use those bodies for the study of medicine in the Hebrew University. Okay, some people said I shouldn't teach this, but I'm teaching it anyway, because you'll see that Rabbi Uziel disagrees. And he says we should not be concerned in this, maybe this will cause Gentiles hatred. If the non-Jews learn that the Jewish people are using only bodies from India, maybe this will cause them to hate the Jews, right? No. The upright among them can understand that this people that were chosen to bring to the world the holy light of knowledge of the true God, monotheism, and because of this suffers untold suffering, like in this building several hundred years ago, is also worthy to some privilege of holiness. The Jews have suffered enough because of their beliefs, and if, on the other hand, they can benefit by not having their own bodies dissected, this is a privilege that should be given to them. And those of them who are spoiled, who hate the Jews, will not stop to slander and insult us, even if we take a deceased Jew for dissection. And the suggestion that Jews should sell or donate their bodies to be used after they're deceased when they die is not a viable option. We can't follow that, for the prohibition of disfiguring a corpse comes from God's image that is in man, as we saw earlier. That is specially manifest in the Israelite people. And who is the human that can permit God's portion? In other words, here, I'm willing to donate my body to science after I die. But my body, according to Rav Kook, does not belong only to me. It belongs also to God, in whose image I was created, and therefore, nobody can give agreement from the side of God to have this dissection. Now, when you think about this, or when I think about it, there's a lot of problems in this approach. And also, in the last passage that we read, there's a problem about Rabbi Kook's image of God. Because he thinks that if God, the person donated his body to science, but God says, no, I can't do that. Why? Because this person was created in my image, right? That's his idea of what God's response will be. But on the other hand, what kind of image of God does he have? Maybe God would be happy to have this body used to save human lives. who are also in God's image, right? So there's a certain theological background to this position which ultimately is opposed to the use of Jewish bodies in the study and research of medicine. Okay, I should also say, which I didn't say at the beginning, that if anybody has a question or a comment, they should feel free to say it. Okay? Okay, we can move up and now see Rabbi Uziel. Okay, Rabbi Uziel was born in 1880 in the old city of Jerusalem. And at the time that in the early 1930s, he was the chief rabbi of the city of Tel Aviv. Later on, in 1939, he became the Sephardic chief rabbi of the entire Palestine. So in 1948, when the state of Israel began, he was the first Sephardic chief rabbi of the state of Israel. And he says that at the beginning, he knew that this is a big question. The big question was that sometime in 1926, the dean of the Faculty of Medicine in Warsaw, Poland, noticed that there were many, many Jewish students of medicine, but no Jews were donating their body to science. And he suggested that if the Jews would not donate bodies to science, they would not admit Jewish students. And Rabbi Uziel says, okay, that this is very important, that Jewish people should study medicine and participate in saving human lives. Therefore, we have to find a way to permit the use of Jewish bodies for medical dissection and education and research. And he brings examples from the rabbinic tradition in which, okay, an example which he cites from the Talmud, which was a very large book composed in the year 500 approximately, that there was a young person, a young boy, who his father died. So now the boy inherited from the father. Then the boy died, or the youth died, and his father's relatives thought that they would now inherit the money. But it turned out that he had already sold all of his father's property to someone else. So the relatives said, just a minute, we think that this boy was too young legally to be able to sell the property. He was still too young. How did they know who is old and who is young in ancient times? They didn't have birth records. According to the physical signs of the body, puberty, okay, the body begins to change, hair begins to grow, and this is a sign that the person is now an adult. That's why, by the way, in the Jewish tradition, the bar mitzvah is for a boy at 13 and for a girl at 12, because the sign of puberty happened usually earlier in girls than in boys. So they came to Rabbi Akiva and they said, this young fellow who was recently buried, we want to open up the burial and check his body to show that he was not an adult and he couldn't have sold the property. And Rabbi Akiva said, no, you can't do that. you as the relatives have special obligation to respect the dead relative, and you can't just open up his grave to get money. From this, however, we learn that if it was not the relatives, and it was some other person who might lose a lot of money, it might be permitted to open up the grave. And Rabbi Uziel says on line 171, from this we learn that relatives are not allowed to disfigure a deceased relative, although this means that they lose the chance to inherit, to get the money. But anyone who is not a relative may disfigure a deceased person so as not to lose money. And if this is true with regard to money, how much more so is it true in a situation of possible danger to life, that the relatives cannot prevent dissection? Okay, so now he's saying, first of all, if by dissecting a body, life can be saved, this is justified, and we don't have to go now to the procedure of burial. Furthermore, he says, and he's saying it more later, the relatives cannot resist. Because, he says later on, here is a person who died. To whom does this body belong? And Rav Uziel says later on, it doesn't belong to anyone. A human body is not monetary value. It's not property. It doesn't belong to anybody. Nobody can sell it. Nobody can buy it. Even the relatives don't own this. The relatives have an obligation to bury him because he is from their family. But they don't own the body. They cannot prevent the body from being used to save life. Saving life overrides all of the commandments almost, and certainly if the relatives, they have an obligation to honor their dead relative, but that obligation is not more important than saving human lives. And then he says that indeed the whole idea of what does it mean to disfigure or dishonor a dead body, and we can go up from here, okay, you see they bring again the woman who dies in labor, and we can go now to line 185, okay, what does he say? He says, if we think about what it means to disfigure or dishonor a human body, this can only be understood by the context. Perhaps we are doing the same thing to a body. Somebody sees a human body, they bring a knife, they cut open this body. Why are they doing it? To show how they hate this person. They want to destroy this person. They don't want to respect this person. Oh, that is absolutely forbidden. But if now will come a professor of medicine, and he will come and he says, look, students, you want to learn how to save lives, how to be, now I'm going to cut open this body to teach you. That's not being done to dishonor the dead person. This is being done to honor and preserve life. So the same activity can be either a terrible sin or a very good act with a noble purpose. Okay. In our case, he's writing on line 187, when they dissect the deceased to learn the art of healing in order to heal other humans, it is rationally obvious that this is completely permitted. And there is no doubt that all of the great rabbis of the past, who were also expert doctors, had to check the bodies of dead persons in order to learn and train, and did not consider this disfigurement. Now, of course, he is not acquainted with the history of medicine. Okay, so in the year 1200 or 1100, many important rabbis were also medical doctors, but they didn't have to learn by dissection because that was not the method of learning at that time. But he's projecting it backward. He says, if this great rabbi was a doctor, then they must have been engaged in dissection, and that shows that it's no problem. And then he cites the case of Rabbi Landau. Was asked about a Jewish man who died because of sickness in his gallbladder, and so on. And he says that Rabbi Landau said he doesn't allow it. There is not any specific person who currently needs this. Okay, go further up, more up. And even the doctors of non-Jews conduct such experiments only on persons who have been executed or someone who sold his body before death. And if we, the Jews, likely permit this, they will dissect all our dead. That's what the rabbi in Prague said in the year 1790. Okay, now let's go up some more to the line 214 to 15. And we go up more, and here is what Rabbi Uziel says. I do not see any of the above arguments sufficient to forbid it. With regard to what Rabbi Landau wrote, there is no specific patient, but only maybe someone may come along. How can he deny reality? Certainly, there are always quite a few persons who suffer from the same disease. And if we, at this moment, are not aware of any specific person, tomorrow or the day after it become known to us. And certainly today, when we have instant communication between centers of medicine, then the entire human world is immediately accessible, and there are patients like that who are metaphorically before us. So the reason of Rabbi Landau to deny this is not relevant today. Furthermore, he says, this doesn't mean that we will always have to do anything, what he says, but in the case of an autopsy, if it is not considered upon this specific body, he's not talking about now for dissection of teaching, but for learning from medical failures in order to get medical progress. If it is not conducted upon this specific body because of the notion that it is forbidden, it will never be done. This knowledge will be forever hidden from us, and with certainty will lead to the death of several persons. Okay, so we have to treat, if any case of problem in understanding what the person is suffering from, or some failure in the medical procedure, and we're not sure what went wrong, we can do that dissection immediately to save lives, because somewhere in the world there is somebody who we will be able to help ultimately by that manner. Now it's true, he says, we don't want people to just come and cut up bodies indiscriminately. So he says, what can we do? If, on page 223, if there is a specific medical condition that the doctors do not understand, and they seek to learn from a specific opportunity by conducting a dissection, and if Jewish doctors will not be able to acquire medical knowledge because the medical schools will not allow them if Jewish bodies are not donated, this will certainly lead to endangering lives, for there are sick people at all times. Everyone needs healing. It is completely permitted to dissect the dead with great care, so as not to relate to the body in a debasing or light-headed manner. So in medical schools or medical research, it's very important that the doctors and the researchers treat the body that they are working on with great respect. My cousin, my older cousin, told me that when he was studying medicine, and he was in different wards, this ward, that, and then his friends would come back and they would say to each other, "Did you see that liver in room number 3? Meaning the patient whose liver had a certain condition, but they weren't talking about the patient. They were talking, "Did you see that liver in room number 3? And he decided that he would never do that. Okay, so doctors, says Rabbi Uziel, when they are dissecting, when they are doing research using human bodies, it's important for them to consider and think it's human beings that we are now working on with the purpose of saving the lives of many humans, but this specific body must always be treated with respect and care." And on line 244, our conclusion is that in situations where there is great life-saving benefit to all humans, we find no grounds to prohibit dissection. To the contrary, there are grounds to permit it. Anyone who knows about the development and broadening of this wisdom, meaning of medical research, and its usefulness, will not doubt the efficacy, the usefulness of dissection for even a moment. This is even more so in our times, when surgical procedures to cure the sick have greatly developed, thereby curing many sick individuals who are close to the gates of death. Dissection of dead bodies most certainly helps greatly to become acquainted with the sickness and its manifestations in other organs of the body, as well as ways as, let's go up, move up the screen please, as well as ways of surgical action and healing. The dead does not feel debasement nor disfigurement. The dead person is dead. What we do to him or her is our way of showing respect for human life. Medical study and medical research is another way of showing respect and value for human life. So for this purpose, we can use the dead persons. Okay, and now he finally gets to the place where he is taking issue with Rav Kook, although he doesn't mention his name personally, in line 260. Perhaps you might say this can be done by dissecting the bodies of Gentiles, of non-Jews. Such a suggestion may not even be uttered, even be spoken, and a fortiori may not be written. He said it's outrageous for anybody to even think this. For the prohibition against disfiguring a dead body is to avoid debasing all living humans. Because leaving the body of a human being created in God's image and graced with intelligence and wisdom to rule and control the entire creation, with that body now a dead person should be cast in the public domain, disfigured and full of meaning. It's nobody's bothering it, nobody's taking care of it, nobody's taking. So now leaving that is a terrible disrespect to who? All human beings, he says, that's what the Talmudic source says, biziona de kulu chaya. It's an insult to all living human beings. And not of all Jews, in line 265. And most certainly there is no difference at all between Gentile and Jew, nor between persons, even as the Mishnah said, persons condemned to death or others. In this respect, the honor and consideration that we must give toward human bodies is across the board to all persons, and not because they're Jewish, non-Jewish, sinners, non-sinners, good people, but everybody is equal because everybody expresses in their own life and their own way the divine image. And then he says, this is not contingent. Here he goes much beyond what almost anybody says today, because in all places that I know, or in many places, we want the agreement either of the dead person, like I carry a card that says that in the event that I die and my body can be used to save lives, okay, I agree to that. But maybe the dead person wrote before he died, I don't agree that my body shall be used in any research to save any human lives. I don't care about that. Or his relatives come and say, what? Our father? You want to take our father and cut him open to do something that might save a life? We refuse. No. Okay, Rav Uziel says, we're not interested because the dead body does not belong to anyone. The idea that we can and should use a body when necessary and proper to save lives is not contingent, does not depend on the wish of the dead person himself, nor upon the assent, the agreement of his relatives. For no person can permit the debasement or disfigurement of his own body. Let's say somebody, before their death, would come, a Jewish person, of course, we're talking about, and say, I would like that after my death, my body should be chopped up into small pieces and fed to the dogs. Okay, Rabbi Uziel would say no. That way is not consonant with honoring the divine image in man. Even if the person said to do that, we rabbis would not agree. But also the opposite is true. Okay? Even if we were to say that this body is the property of the deceased or of his relatives, the need for acquiring medical wisdom would override the ownership of the body. We could take away that body to save human lives, even if the relatives would own it, but really they don't. A dead in line 274, a dead human body is not owned by anyone. The scripture says, until you return to the earth, for from it were you taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. It is not the case that someone is saving life by debasing a body. Rather, we are saving human life in general by a procedure, dissection, or medical research entailing which disfiguring of the human body, but this is permitted, just as a living individual can agree for his body to be cut in an operation to save his own life. And we'll conclude on line 289. When dissection is permissible, in order to acquire life-saving skills, like in medical school or in research, the operation must be conducted with all the respect, with maintenance of dignity, and with seriousness. And afterwards, care must be taken that the deceased will be returned to burial in an honorable manner, and not even the smallest part of him left unburied. So he's not agreeing to having specimens preserved in jars of formaldehyde for many years. Okay. So, but he is agreeing that any dissection or any action on the dead body that's important and necessary to save lives, either by medical research or by medical training, is a great value that should override the idea of immediate burial. And over the years, this idea has become accepted by more and more rabbis and in medical schools in Israel and in medical research in Israel. Basically, this policy of Rabbi Uziel is followed, but not his idea that the body belongs not to anybody and therefore the relatives cannot resist. Okay, in Israel, you cannot dissect a body and if the relatives oppose it. Sometimes if there is a police case, okay, and the person was killed, or we suspect that he was killed or she was killed, then the police can get the order of a judge to override the objection of the family. But generally, the family can prevent dissection in usual cases, but this is not what Rav Uziel thought. Rav Uziel thought that the importance of saving life is more important than what the family thinks. Okay, so I have concluded my presentation, and we have done a long journey from the first chapter of the book of Genesis of the Bible through rabbinic literature to the disagreement between Rabbi Kook and Rabbi Uziel, which you see is also a disagreement about the universal aspect of the image of God. And I thank you very much for listening.